my time, we heard about during the Second World War, war on food waste. You can look at some of the headings, how countries were trying to ensure that their people, their citizens didn't waste food. And now this is the publication I was talking about, 1978, by the US National Academy of Sciences. And look at the title and focus. Was a problem of developing countries because people were hungry. They were watching on television and see people emaciated and hungry. One of the important things you will also see from this slide here, look at the countries and regions that were identified as working in the area of post-harvest. Of course, Israel has always led in terms of innovation in this area, and you will see the stock products division in Tel Aviv here. And this has continued, as I'm going to show you much later, in terms of the data on publications on the area of post-harvest technology. Now, the summary of what has happened in the past was put together by our late colleague, Adel Kader. But what I wanted you to see here was the fact that the problem of post-harvest losses was in total nearly the same, both developed and developing countries. What was different was in the stage in which losses were happening. And if you look at the summary here, you will see that the average, the mean post-harvest losses was 32% in both developed and developing countries. The reason I put this up is to challenge our evidence. That's the only reason I put it up, is to challenge our evidence. We need data, we need reliable data. As far back as that time, all the research that was done prior to 2005, Adel Kader summarized it and found that both developed and developing countries was just this magical number, one third. I call it magic number. Yeah? So this is important to think about this as we move forward here. So the issue is back on the agenda. What is different with this agenda now is now a global agenda. It's no longer a developing country agenda. This is very, very important. The other factor that is even more important in terms of the global agenda is the issue that my colleagues have talked about in terms of environmental impact, resource use efficiency, water utilization, energy, and so on and so forth. So it now begins to affect all of us much more. It's no longer a developing country problem. So this is important to understand, so that we can actually see how we can control it. And then, of course, you can see the headlines all over the world. Yeah? Look at milk losses in East Africa, $90 million US. And I want to ask you, I don't know how many of us have been to East Africa. Is this true? Is that number true? Even if that number is not correct, it's not true. Does it matter if it is 90 million or 2 million? Those are the issues that we need to deal with. The headlines are all over the place on various issues, and this can be utilized. Fast forward the latest report that has been referenced from FAO. Again, I talk about this magic number, 1/3. 1978, the average post-harvest loss is globally 1/3 of what is produced. 2011, based on literature study again, it says 1/3. So what's wrong with our measurement system? What are we actually measuring? I think these are very, very important. That's why I like the regional approaches. That's why I like the local solutions in trying to deal with these issues. Because these numbers, because one of the challenges those of us who work in the area of post-harvest will have is it's difficult to convince some businesses to invest in value post-harvest reduction. They keep challenging us on these numbers. They say that if we're losing 1/3, maybe we would not have been able to feed the world. That you guys make up this number so that we can give you a research grant. So these are real issues that we have to deal with here. And so if I bring it home to the continent of Africa, where I come from, up to $48 billion per year, the value of this wastage. But we do know that African countries spend close to $50 billion every year importing food from the rest of the world, mainly processed food. So there's a business sense here. There's a business proposition. It makes economic sense. So what are those global commitments? We had some of them already here. Now, these global commitments is what I call the 50% reduction. So the losses are 1/3, the commitment is to reduce by 50%. But look at the commitment in 1975, reduction by 50% to be measured in 1985. And now we're still talking about 50% reduction in 2018 to be measured in by 2020 or 2030 in the Netherlands and other places. Are we setting the wrong targets? Are they too high, too low? Are they realistic? Is it because we don't have reliable data? These are issues that we need to address. Whose job is this to do? Even in the continent of Africa, 50% reduction by 2025, based on 2013 levels. Who actually knows these 2013 levels? Who knows? Is it for maize? Is it for cassava? Is it in Nigeria? Is it in Morocco? Is it in Lusaka? There's a role for science. There's a role for science for us to get real data that's reliable, that can guide and influence policy. What is the progress? Well, how do you measure your progress if your targets are not really sure? If the numbers are not accurate? What value, what methodology was used to get those initial targets? Are you sure your new methodology of measurement is going to replicate exactly what was used 40 years ago to collect some of those data? Those are some of the issues that we have to deal with. And that is why I like this localized approach, because food waste and food loss is a local problem. Those global commitments are important. They are useful as a guide. But in order to solve the problem, it has to come back to the communities. It has to come back to the households. And that is what I think that we need to do to move forward here. So, going back to the continent of Africa again, we have unique challenges there. We've talked about the role of smallholder farmers as the majority of the people who produce the food that we eat on the continent, even though I challenged that in 2018. Maybe that is the way it was when I was born. But in 2018, if we're now spending $50 billion every year to import food in Africa, who is growing that food? Are those smallholder farmers in Africa? Probably not. That's why they are called imported food. So there are issues in trying to meet the challenges facing this type of farmers who are growing locally, who don't have the resources, who don't have the expertise, who don't have the infrastructure to reduce post-harvest losses. So part of our solution has to be localized to see how we can assist this type of producers and handlers to deal with the problem of post-harvest losses. So this is my summary based on what I've been doing over the last 30 years that must be in place. And this has been encapsulated in a lot of the regions and the cities around the world who have made remarkable progress in reducing food wastage. The issue of infrastructure is important. You need institutions. That's why we have the local governments come to receive prizes here. People have to drive these things. We need leadership in those institutions. As we heard, a lot of them gave acknowledgement and recognition to the mayors or to some of the politicians who gave them resources and the leverage to do what they needed to do. We need knowledge. Very, very important. There's a limit to how much knowledge you can import. So we need to find a way to capacitate local institutions and individuals. Those of us here talking about food wastage is because we understand it a little bit. I've been involved in projects where it has taken months and months to train people on how to measure food wastage. And most of the people hired to do the job actually don't understand what you're talking about because it's not their skill base. This is very, very important. So we take it for granted. And then finally, markets are very, very crucial. Somebody must want the product. And somebody must also want the services here. A lot of research has also shown that it is not just about the technology side. We need to talk about policy. Look at this work by IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute, many years back, looking at the impact of investment in post-harvest research and innovation. Look at the percentages on the right-hand side. And look at the percentage for policies and institutions, 14,000% return on investment compared with physical technology. So these are some of the areas that we need to talk about. I'm going to finish quickly with the 1 or 2 slides. So in South Africa, through the South African Research Chair, we focus on human capacity development and looking at technologies that our local farmers and businesses can deploy to make their businesses more efficient and make more money and hopefully in the process reduce post-harvest losses. Just a couple of slides here. Now, if post-harvest losses is the highest in Africa, then how come that the research output and contribution of Africa is the lowest in the world? So something is wrong. The place you have the biggest problem, and they also participate least in generating the knowledge and innovation to solve the problem. We need to address that. Look at the rise of China. I'll keep putting Israel here. You can see the top 10 countries in the world in terms of innovation in post-harvest. Israel continues to feature. You can also remember the data I showed in 1978. Israel was there. So there is something, there's some lesson to be learned that can be shared globally in true cooperation. And this is the type of things that we should be encouraging moving forward here. Human capacity development is important. We use the South African Research Chair based in South Africa here and leverage to create human capacity on the rest of the continent to address the problem of post-harvest losses. These are some of the practical approaches that we have to follow here. And then finally, this is a product that has a lot of origin around here, but Israel played an important role in commercializing pomegranate. We have utilized pomegranate as a model crop to demonstrate what is possible in training human capacity and at the same time reducing post-harvest losses. And a lot of this information is available on the web. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me?
She was great.
I don't think so. Oh, no. Thank you very much, Professor Linus. Your words were accurate and very, very rightly presented. I would like to ask our next speaker, Dr. Ron Porat. Ron is a senior researcher at the Department of Post-Harvest Science at the